At 5:56 a.m. on January 9, 2026, NASA's satellites captured something that left climate scientists speechless. A wall of water 10 meters high, 33 feet of death and destruction, thundering down the sacred valleys of Mount Everest at highway speeds. 348 people are dead. 24 million are in crisis. But what NASA discovered in the atmospheric data will terrify you more than the flood itself. Because this killer wave was just the beginning. The morning sun had not yet touched the peaks of Kamalanga when the mountain began to scream. Residents describe a sound like 1,000 freight trains colliding. But this wasn't machinery breaking down. This was the Earth itself fracturing. Within minutes, a glacial lake that had existed for centuries simply disappeared. 50 million cubic meters of water, enough to fill 20,000 Olympic swimming pools, exploded from its ancient prison and became a liquid battering ram racing towards sleeping villages below. The numbers are staggering, but they only scratch the surface of this catastrophe. Waves reaching 6 to 10 meters in height, 20 to 33 feet of churning ice, water, and debris, obliterated everything in their path. The surge traveled 10 kilometers in under 15 minutes, giving families mere moments to flee. Those who survived describe watching their neighbors vanish beneath the torrent, entire lifetimes erased in seconds. But here's what makes this disaster truly unprecedented. It wasn't just one lake that failed. Multiple glacial lakes across the Everest region destabilized simultaneously, creating a cascade of destruction that transformed one of the world's most iconic landscapes into a hellscape of mud, ice, and twisted metal. The economic damage? An astronomical $247 billion, making this the costliest natural disaster in Chinese history. The Chinese government declared a national emergency within 12 hours, mobilizing 50,000 troops for rescue operations. Yet even as helicopters airlifted survivors from isolated peaks, something far more terrifying was emerging from NASA's atmospheric analysis. Something that suggests this catastrophe was no random act of nature, but rather the opening act of a much larger climate drama unfolding across our planet. What NASA's satellites revealed will haunt climate scientists for years to come. This wasn't a typical glacial lake outburst flood. This was atmospheric warfare on a scale we've never witnessed. A supercharged atmospheric river, carrying moisture equivalent to 15 times the flow of the Mississippi River, collided head-on with an Arctic air mass stalled over the Himalayas. The result? A meteorological bomb that detonated across the roof of the world. Think of an atmospheric river as a conveyor belt of water vapor stretching across thousands of miles of ocean. But this one was different. Satellite data shows it carried abnormal moisture levels from the Indian Ocean, supercharged by record-breaking sea surface temperatures. When this river of vapor slammed into the frigid air mass over Everest, it created a thermal shock that turned stable glacial lakes into ticking time bombs. The science is as elegant as it is terrifying. Glacial lakes exist in a delicate balance, held back by natural dams of rock and ice that have taken centuries to form. But introduce rapid temperature fluctuations, intense precipitation, and sudden ground vibrations, and these ancient barriers become catastrophically unstable. The atmospheric river delivered all three triggers simultaneously, creating what researchers are calling a perfect storm of glacial failure. Here's where it gets truly frightening. The collapse wasn't gradual. Seismic monitoring stations recorded the initial breach at exactly 5:56 a.m., followed by a domino effect of secondary failures across the region. Each collapse sent shock waves through the bedrock, destabilizing neighboring lakes in a chain reaction that turned the entire Everest region into a maze of unstable water bombs. But there's something even more unsettling hidden in the data. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal about these atmospheric rivers will change how you think about climate change forever. Behind every statistic is a human face, and the faces from Kamalanga tell stories that will break your heart. A farmer named Chen Wei watched the wave consume his village from a hillside where he'd climbed to check his water buffalo. "I heard a roar like 1,000 lions," he posted on social media. "Then the water came. I lost everything, my home, my crops, my life." His post has been shared over 1 million times, becoming the digital voice of a disaster too vast to comprehend. In the village of Tingri, a schoolteacher named Pema Dolma saved 30 children by leading them to higher ground just minutes before their school vanished beneath the surge. She spent 8 hours holding the youngest ones as they shivered in sub-zero temperatures, watching rescue helicopters search the devastation below. Her story of heroism emerged only when parents' desperate social media posts revealed how she'd counted every child, ensuring not one was lost to the mountain's fury. The displacement numbers tell their own horrific tale. 1.5 million people, imagine the entire population of Philadelphia, suddenly homeless in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Temporary shelters house over 300,000 survivors, but shelter is a generous term for tarp structures erected in freezing mountain conditions. Children are developing hypothermia faster than medical teams can treat them. Perhaps most heartbreaking are the missing persons reports flooding Chinese social media. Over 800 people remain unaccounted for, their fates unknown as rescue teams dig through debris fields that stretch for miles. Families post photographs of loved ones alongside GPS coordinates of where they were last seen, creating a digital memorial wall that grows larger every hour. The world's leading glaciologists are issuing warnings that should terrify every person on this planet. Dr. Li Wei from Beijing University, who has studied Himalayan glacial systems for 3 decades, made a statement that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. This glacial lake outburst flood was a direct result of glacial melt accelerated by climate change. Atmospheric rivers are becoming more frequent and more powerful. Kamalanga is not an anomaly, it's a preview. The International Center for Integrated Mountain Development released emergency findings that paint an even darker picture. Their research team has identified over 8,000 glacial lakes across the Himalayan region, with 200 classified as high risk for catastrophic failure. But here's the kicker. That assessment was made before the atmospheric river phenomenon that triggered Kamalanga was fully understood. Climate models now predict a 30% increase in extreme precipitation events like atmospheric rivers in the Himalayas by 2050. That means more supercharged moisture bombs colliding with glacial systems that are already destabilized by rising temperatures. Dr. Anil Kulkarni, a glaciologist whose warnings about Himalayan instability have been ignored for years, told reporters, "Glacial retreat in the Everest region has accelerated by 20% since 2000. We're not just watching climate change, we're witnessing climate warfare." The United Nations has launched a $100 million humanitarian appeal. But even UN coordinators admit the scale of displacement is staggering. The 24 million people affected by this disaster represent just the beginning, warned the UN's Climate Emergency Coordinator. These numbers will multiply across every mountain range on Earth. What makes Kamalanga truly terrifying isn't just the scale of destruction, it's the pattern emerging from the chaos. This wasn't an isolated event, but rather the latest in an escalating series of glacial catastrophes that are reshaping our understanding of climate risk. The Kamoli disaster in India killed 200 people in 2021. The Kedarnath flood claimed over 5,000 lives in 2013. Each event more devastating than the last, each one dismissed as a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. But the data reveals a different story. Atmospheric rivers are intensifying at an unprecedented rate, driven by ocean temperatures that have broken records for 6 consecutive years. What scientists once considered extreme weather events are becoming the new normal, and our mountain communities are bearing the deadly cost of our collective climate denial. The Chinese government's deployment of 50,000 troops represents the largest disaster response in the country's history. Roads carved into cliff sides have been torn away, cutting off rescue access to entire valleys. Communication towers lie twisted in the mud, hampering coordination efforts that could save lives. Here's what keeps climate scientists awake at night. If atmospheric rivers continue strengthening at current rates, glacial lake outburst floods could become annual events across the Himalayas. The 200 high-risk lakes identified by researchers could fail in rapid succession, creating a cascade of disasters that would dwarf even Kamolanga's devastation. The economic implications alone, $247 billion for a single event, could bankrupt entire nations. Stay with me, because the historical parallels I'm about to reveal will show you exactly why this pattern of escalation should terrify every person living downstream from mountains. History has a cruel way of repeating itself, and the echoes of past glacial disasters make Kamolanga's devastation even more chilling. In 1941, Peru's Lake Palcacocha burst without warning, sending a 40-foot wall of water racing toward the city of Huaraz. 1,800 people died in minutes, entire neighborhoods erased from existence. The survivors described the same thunderous roar, the same impossible speed of destruction that families in Kamolanga witnessed 85 years later. But there's a crucial difference that makes 2026's disaster infinitely more dangerous. The 1941 Peru flood was triggered by an earthquake, a violent but isolated geological event. Kamolanga was caused by atmospheric conditions that are becoming increasingly common across our warming planet. We're not dealing with random geological bad luck anymore. We're watching climate change weaponize our mountain systems against the communities that depend on them. Right now, as rescue teams continue pulling survivors from the wreckage, seismic monitors are detecting something that has emergency officials deeply concerned. Secondary tremors from the initial glacial collapses are destabilizing smaller lakes throughout the region, creating what experts describe as a cascade effect that could trigger additional floods without warning. The Chinese Meteorological Administration has issued unprecedented warnings for the entire Himalayan corridor. Weather forecasts predict additional rainfall over the coming week. Rain that could prove catastrophic for the thousands of survivors huddled in emergency shelters and the rescue teams working around the clock to reach isolated communities. But here's what makes the current situation truly nightmarish. The Kamolanga Hydroelectric Dam, a $2 billion infrastructure project, was reduced to rubble in under an hour. Its collapse sent another surge of floodwater downstream, creating a secondary disaster that caught evacuation teams completely off guard. Reports suggest this secondary flood may have claimed additional lives, though exact numbers remain unknown as communication networks struggle to reconnect severed regions. International aid is pouring into the disaster zone, but the sheer scale of destruction is overwhelming even coordinated global relief efforts. Nepal has sent 200 rescue workers across treacherous mountain passes, while India is providing satellite imagery to map the full extent of the devastation. Yet, with over 800 people still missing, and winter temperatures dropping below survival thresholds, time is running out for the most vulnerable survivors. The scenarios emerging from climate modeling centers are keeping disaster response teams in a state of constant alert. If current weather patterns continue, atmospheric rivers could strike the destabilized glacial systems repeatedly over the coming months, creating a series of cascading disasters that would make Kamolanga look like a warning shot. The 200 high-risk glacial lakes identified by researchers could fail in rapid succession, turning the entire Himalayan region into a disaster zone of unimaginable proportions. Economic analysts are painting an equally grim picture. The $247 billion loss from a single flood event represents just the beginning of a potential economic catastrophe that could reshape global trade patterns. The Himalayan corridor serves as a critical link between China and South Asian markets. Disruption of these trade routes could trigger supply chain collapses affecting everything from electronics to agricultural products worldwide. But the human cost of future disasters could dwarf even the current tragedy. Climate refugees from mountain communities could number in the tens of millions as glacial systems continue destabilizing across the world's major mountain ranges. The Alps, the Andes, the Rockies. No mountain region with glacial lakes is immune from the atmospheric river phenomenon that devastated Kamalanga. Recovery timelines stretch far beyond the immediate crisis. Engineers estimate it will take 10 to 15 years to rebuild the infrastructure destroyed in a single morning, assuming no additional disasters strike the region. That's a decade and a half of economic disruption, population displacement, and community trauma, all from one atmospheric river collision with unstable glacial systems. Here's the truth that governments don't want you to understand. Kamalanga represents the new reality of life on a warming planet, and we are completely unprepared for. What's coming next? The atmospheric river that triggered this disaster was not an anomaly. It was a preview of the meteorological weapons that climate change is creating across our planet's most vulnerable regions. NASA's atmospheric analysis reveals that similar conditions are building over other glacial regions right now. The Andes Mountains in South America show identical atmospheric river formations. The Alaska Range is experiencing unprecedented temperature fluctuations. Even the glacial systems of the European Alps are showing signs of the same instability that turned Kamalanga's peaceful morning into a hellscape of destruction. The most terrifying aspect of this disaster isn't the death toll or the economic losses. It's the complete failure of our early warning systems. 20 minutes of advance warning for a catastrophe that took centuries to set up and seconds to unleash. Our technology, our preparedness, our understanding of glacial systems, all of it proved utterly inadequate when the mountain decided to release its frozen prisoners. Climate scientists are now racing to reassess glacial lake risk across every mountain range on Earth. But the process could take years while atmospheric rivers continue intensifying. We're playing catch-up with a climate system that's accelerating beyond our ability to predict or prepare for its next move. The 800 people still missing in the Kamalanga region represent more than tragic statistics. They're a warning about what happens when we underestimate the power of our changing climate. 348 confirmed dead. 800 missing, 24 million lives disrupted. But the most terrifying number is the one we can't calculate yet. How many more glacial bombs are waiting in mountains around the world? And when will the next atmospheric river find them? Subscribe now, because this story is far from over.